Commander Jake Martinez pressed his face against the cold metal window of the orbital defense station and watched the alien ships floating in the darkness like deadly stars. For 3 months now, these strange vessels had surrounded Earth, and every day they sent the same message to every radio and television on the planet. The message was simple and terrifying. Surrender now or we will destroy your world. Jake had heard it so many times he could repeat it word for word, but it still made his skin crawl when that cold mechanical voice spoke through the speakers. The alien ships were beautiful in a way that made Jake feel sick. They looked like giant crystals made of silver and blue light that twisted and turned in patterns that hurt to look at for too long. Earth's best scientists said the ships were at least 1,000 years ahead of human technology and maybe more. The weapons they carried could turn entire cities into glass, and their shields could stop anything humans could throw at them. Jake had seen the reports from the colony worlds that had already fallen. Mars had lasted 6 hours. Europa had surrendered. Without firing a shot down on Earth in a secret laboratory buried deep under the mountains of Colorado, Dr. Lisa Thompson was doing something the aliens probably thought was impossible. She was studying their technology. 3 weeks ago, a small alien scout ship had crashed in the Nevada desert, and the military had managed to recover some pieces before the main fleet could retrieve them. Lisa had been working day and night to understand how the alien machines worked, and what she had found made her both excited and terrified. The alien technology was incredibly advanced, but it followed patterns that seemed almost too perfect. Every circuit and every program was designed with mathematical precision that left no room for error or change. The aliens built their machines to work exactly as planned every single time, with no deviation and no surprises. Lisa realized this might be their weakness, but she needed more time to prove her theory at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. Captain Ryan Davis was receiving orders that would change the course of human history. Admiral Kate Johnson sat across from him at a metal table in a room with no windows and walls thick enough to stop nuclear bombs. She had been Earth's top military strategist for 20 years, and she had spent the last 3 months developing a plan that most people would call completely insane. Admiral Johnson told Ryan that traditional military tactics would never work against the aliens. Earth's weapons were too weak and their ships were too slow. But humans had something the aliens did not understand, and that was the ability to do things that made no logical sense. She explained that every battle the aliens had won followed the same pattern. They studied their enemy, calculated the best response, and then executed their plan with perfect precision. They expected their enemies to do the same thing. Ryan listened as the Admiral outlined a strategy that would use humanity's greatest weakness as their most powerful weapon. Instead of fighting like a proper military force, Earth's defenders would fight like humans. They would be unpredictable, chaotic, and completely insane. They would make decisions that defied logic and take actions that seemed to serve no purpose. The alien computers would not be able to predict what humans would do next because humans themselves did not know what they would do next. Meanwhile, on the alien flagship, High Commander Veltar was growing impatient with these primitive creatures. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered over 300 worlds, and every single one had either surrendered immediately or been destroyed within days. These humans were different, though. They kept preparing for battle even though they had to know it was hopeless. Their weapons were laughably weak, and their ships were held together with metal and chemical fuel like something from the stone. As Veltar studied the reports from his scouts who had been observing human military preparations, the humans were moving their ships into defensive positions around their planet, but their formation made no tactical sense. Some ships were grouped together while others floated alone. Some faced toward the alien fleet while others pointed in seemingly random directions. The human commanders appeared to be following no known military doctrine, and their behavior seemed almost random. What Veltar did not understand was that this randomness was exactly the point. Deep in the Colorado laboratory, Dr. Lisa Thompson had finished her analysis of the alien technology, and her discovery would change everything. The alien machines were programmed to respond to logical threats and predictable behavior. They could calculate the optimal response to any conventional military strategy, but they had no programming for dealing with opponents who acted without reason or pattern. Lisa sent her findings to Admiral Johnson along with a recommendation that would sound crazy to anyone who did not understand alien psychology. She suggested that Earth's defenders should abandon all military training and instead fight using pure human instinct. No battle plans, no formations, no logical objectives. Just humans being humans in the most chaotic and unpredictable way possible. As the 3-month deadline approached, Jake Martinez received new orders that made him question the sanity of Earth's leadership. He was to take his small squadron of patrol ships and attack the alien fleet using tactics that violated every rule of space combat he had ever learned. His mission was not to win or even to survive, but simply to confuse the enemy for as long as possible. The stage was set for a battle unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. On one side stood the Zephyrian Empire with their perfect ships and flawless technology. On the other side stood humanity with nothing but determination, creativity, and a willingness to try anything no matter how stupid it might seem. The aliens expected a quick victory over a primitive species, but they had no idea they were about to face an enemy that would rewrite the rules of warfare itself. The morning of the 4th month brought no change to the alien blockade around Earth. High Commander Veltar stood in the crystal chamber that served as his bridge and watched the primitive planet spin slowly beneath his fleet. The deadline had passed, and still these humans refused to surrender. Their pathetic orbital stations continued to broadcast defiant messages while their crude ships moved in patterns that made no sense to any civilized military mind. Veltar had conquered worlds with populations in the billions and technologies that spanned star systems, but none had been as stubborn as these humans. Most species recognized the futility of resistance when faced with Zephyrian superiority. They would negotiate surrender terms or at least attempt some form of logical military response. The humans did neither. They simply continued their seemingly random preparations as if they believed they could actually win. From his command chair, Veltar reviewed the tactical analysis prepared by his war computers. The humans possessed approximately 2,000 combat vessels of various sizes and capabilities. Most were converted civilian craft with weapons that could barely scratch Zephyrian armor. Their most powerful warships carried nuclear weapons that were effective against other human vessels but would dissipate harmlessly against alien shields. The computers calculated that the entire human fleet could be eliminated in less than 6 hours with minimal losses to the Zephyrian force. Were puzzled. Veltar was not the weakness of human technology, but the apparent randomness of human behavior. His scouts reported that human ships were constantly changing positions without any discernible pattern. Some vessels would accelerate toward the alien fleet only to reverse course and retreat to seemingly random locations. Others would spin in place for hours before suddenly racing toward empty space. The behavior defied all known principles of military strategy. Deep beneath the surface of Earth, in her hidden laboratory, Dr. Lisa Thompson was putting the finishing touches on a discovery that would reshape warfare throughout the galaxy. She had spent weeks analyzing the alien technology recovered from the crashed scout ship, and what she found confirmed her worst fears and greatest hopes. Zephyrian war machines were indeed far superior to anything humans had ever built, but they possessed a fundamental weakness that their creators never imagined. The alien computers were programmed to analyze enemy behavior and predict optimal responses. Based on logical military doctrine, they could calculate exactly how any rational opponent would react to Zephyrian tactics and prepare countermeasures accordingly. This system had made them virtually unbeatable against every other species they had encountered, because every other species fought according to established rules of warfare. Lisa realized that humans were probably the first species the aliens had met who were capable of completely abandoning logic when the situation demanded it. Human history was filled with military victories that made no strategic sense and defeats that should have been impossible. Humans could convince themselves that a hopeless cause was worth dying for, or that a suicidal attack might somehow succeed against impossible odds. She sent her final report to Admiral Johnson with a single recommendation that would have gotten her court-martialed in any previous war. Earth's military should abandon every doctrine, every strategy, and every principle they had ever learned about combat. Instead, they should fight like desperate humans with nothing left to lose and no concern for tactical sensibility at. The Pentagon Admiral Johnson read Lisa's report and smiled for the first time in months. She had been developing a similar theory, based on her own analysis of human military history. The greatest human victories had often come from commanders who broke the rules and did things that no rational enemy would expect. From ancient battles where vastly outnumbered forces had won through sheer audacity, to modern conflicts where technological disadvantages had been overcome through creativity and determination, Johnson called together her senior staff and outlined a battle plan that would have been rejected by any war college in human history. Earth's defenders would be divided into hundreds of small independent units with no central command structure and no predetermined objectives. Each unit would be given complete freedom to engage the enemy using whatever tactics seemed appropriate. At the moment, the only rule was that there would be no rules. Captain Ryan Davis received his orders with a mixture of excitement and terror. He would command a squadron of 12 converted cargo ships armed with mining lasers and told to attack the alien fleet in whatever manner he thought best. His ships were slow, lightly armed, and completely outclassed by even the smallest Zephyrian vessel, but he was expected to somehow delay the enemy advance long enough for other units to implement their own chaotic strategies. Ryan gathered his crews and explained the mission in terms that would have horrified his academy instructors. They were not expected to win or even survive, but simply to confuse the aliens for as long as possible. Every action should be unpredictable, and every decision should defy conventional military wisdom. If something seemed like a bad idea, it was probably exactly what they should do. Meanwhile, Professor Alan Carter was working on a different aspect of the defense plan in his laboratory at MIT. He had been studying alien communication protocols and discovered that their networks used incredibly sophisticated encryption and data compression systems. The aliens could transmit enormous amounts of tactical information across vast distances in mere seconds, but their systems were designed to handle only military communications. Allen proposed flooding the alien networks with random human data to overwhelm their processing capacity. He suggested broadcasting everything from social media posts to cooking shows directly into Zephyrian communication channels. The alien computers would waste enormous amounts of processing power trying to decode what they assumed must be encrypted. Battle Plans Lieutenant Colonel Amy Walsh was implementing the ground-based portion of the defense strategy. Earth's surface installations were being programmed to operate according to what she called organized chaos theory. Radar stations would track random objects instead of alien ships. Missile launchers would fire at predetermined coordinates regardless of whether targets were present. Communication centers would broadcast contradictory orders to units that did not exist. The goal was to create so much meaningless activity that alien surveillance systems would be unable to distinguish between real military preparations and elaborate deception operations. The aliens would see thousands of human installations apparently preparing for battle, but would be unable to determine which ones posed actual threats. As the final preparations were completed, Jake Martinez received word that the aliens had begun moving toward Earth. Long-range sensors showed the crystal ships breaking formation and accelerating toward the inner system. The Zephyrians had apparently decided that the deadline for surrender had expired and the time for conquest had begun. Jake looked out at the handful of human ships surrounding his orbital station and wondered if Admiral Johnson's plan was brilliant or insane. In a few hours, they would find out whether humanity's capacity for chaos could overcome alien perfection. He activated his communication system and sent the same message to every human ship in the system. The time for preparation was over, and the time for humanity to show the galaxy what they were truly capable of had finally arrived. The first shots of the war were fired at exactly 8 in the morning Earth Standard Time, but they came from the most unexpected source imaginable. Captain Steve Miller commanded a squadron of garbage haulers that had been converted into combat vessels using spare parts and determination. His ships were slow and ugly, but they moved in a formation that no military academy had ever taught, and no alien computer could predict. Steve had received orders to attack the alien left flank using unconventional tactics, but the definition of unconventional had been left entirely to his imagination. He decided that if the aliens expected humans to behave logically, then the most logical thing to do was behave completely illogically. His 12 ships approached the enemy formation while broadcasting old television shows and performing barrel rolls that served no tactical purpose whatsoever. The Zephyrian ships detected the approaching humans and prepared to engage, but their targeting computers encountered something they had never experienced before. The human vessels were moving in patterns that seemed to follow no mathematical model. They would accelerate randomly, change direction without warning, and occasionally stop moving entirely for no apparent reason. The alien weapon systems could not calculate firing solutions for targets that refused to behave. Predictably high Commander Veltar watched the engagement from his flagship and felt the first stirrings of genuine confusion. His war computers were reporting that 12 primitive cargo vessels were somehow avoiding destruction despite being completely outgunned and outnumbered. The humans appeared to be attacking empty space while simultaneously dancing through weapons. Fire that should have vaporized them instantly. What Veltar did not understand was that Steve Miller had discovered the secret to fighting technologically superior opponents. Instead of trying to match alien precision, he had embraced human chaos. His ships moved according to no plan because they were following no plan. Each pilot was making decisions based on instinct, emotion, and random impulses that no computer could anticipate or counter. Meanwhile, Dr. Helen Brooks was implementing her part of the defense strategy from a bunker deep beneath the Nevada desert. She commanded Earth's Cyber Warfare Division, and her mission was to weaponize humanity's greatest cultural export, which was confusion. Her teams had spent weeks preparing data packages that would completely overwhelm alien information systems. Helen activated her primary program and began flooding Zephyrian communication networks with random human data. Social media posts, cooking videos, music files, and movie clips poured into alien systems at rates that exceeded their processing capacity. The alien computers tried desperately to decode what they assumed were encrypted military communications, but instead found themselves analyzing recipes for chocolate cake and videos of cats doing amusing things. The effect on Zephyrian command and control was immediate and devastating. Their perfectly organized fleet began experiencing communication delays as overloaded. Computers struggled to separate real intelligence from meaningless human cultural output. Orders were delayed, status reports were corrupted, and tactical updates were lost in floods of completely irrelevant information. Captain Ryan Davis led his squadron of converted mining ships against the alien center formation using a strategy he called Murphy's Law warfare. The basic principle was that anything that could go wrong would go wrong, but sometimes going wrong was exactly what you needed. His ships were equipped with industrial cutting lasers that had been modified for combat use and held together with spare parts that should not have worked but somehow did. Ryan's flagship was a former asteroid miner called the Lucky Strike that had been declared unfit for service 3 times but kept flying anyway. Its navigation system was broken, its weapons were jury-rigged, and its hull was patched with metal salvage from a dozen different sources. By every measure of military efficiency, it should have been scrapped years ago, but it had something alien. Ships lacked, which was the stubborn refusal to quit working even when everything was falling apart. The Lucky Strike engaged a Zephyrian cruiser in single combat and should have been destroyed within seconds. Instead, the human ship's faulty navigation system caused it to approach from an angle the alien computers had calculated was impossible. The mining laser fired at the wrong target but ricocheted off debris and struck the alien ship's sensor array. The Lucky Strike's engine exploded, but the explosion somehow propelled the ship directly into the alien vessel's wake. Point engineer Carol Davis was working frantically in the engine room of a converted passenger liner, trying to keep her ship running long enough to complete its mission. Her vessel was part of a group attacking the alien right flank, and it had been damaged in the first exchange of fire. The main power system was failing, the backup generators were overheating, and the structural integrity was compromised in 6 different places instead of abandoning ship or attempting emergency repairs according to standard procedures. Carol decided to embrace the chaos and see what happened when human engineering was pushed beyond all reasonable limits. She rerouted power through systems that were never designed to handle it, bypassed safety protocols that existed for very good reasons, and convinced her crew to keep fighting even as their ship fell apart around them. The result was a vessel that should have been dead in space but somehow kept fighting. Power fluctuations that should have shut down all systems instead created energy surges that overloaded alien sensors. Structural damage that should have destroyed the ship instead created unpredictable movement patterns that confused enemy targeting systems. The passenger liner became a ghost ship that appeared on alien screens one moment and vanished the next. Major Danny Foster commanded a unit of fighter pilots who had been given the simplest and most terrifying orders in military history. They were told to engage the enemy using whatever tactics felt right at the moment, with no regard for their own safety or tactical doctrine. Danny interpreted this as permission to fight like humans had always fought when facing impossible odds, which was with complete disregard for the concept of impossible. His fighters attacked in formations that changed every few seconds, fired at targets that seemed to pose no immediate threat, and occasionally stopped fighting entirely to perform seemingly random maneuvers in empty space. The alien escort ships tried to intercept them but found themselves chasing shadows as human pilots used creativity and desperation to turn every disadvantage into an unexpected opportunity. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Walsh coordinated the ground-based portion of the attack from her command center beneath Cheyenne Mountain. Her job was to create as much confusion as possible using Earth surface installations, and she had embraced the task with enthusiasm that bordered on artistic inspiration. Radar stations tracked flocks of birds instead of alien ships' missile batteries fired at coordinates that had been selected by rolling dice, and communication centers broadcast conflicting orders in languages that did not exist. The effect was to create the impression that Earth's surface was defended by either military geniuses or complete lunatics, and the aliens could not determine which. Their intelligence analysis systems reported thousands of potential threats, but could not identify which ones were real and which ones were elaborate deceptions. Zephyrian commanders found themselves paralyzed by information overload as they tried to respond to attacks that might or might not be actually happening. As the first hour of combat ended, both sides paused to assess the situation, and what they found defied all previous experience of warfare. The technologically superior Zephyrian fleet had failed to achieve the quick victory their computers had predicted, while the primitive human forces had somehow avoided the total destruction that every rational analysis had forecast. The war had only just begun, but already it was clear that this would be unlike any conflict the galaxy had ever witnessed. High Commander Veltar stood in his crystal command chamber staring at tactical displays that showed impossible results. After 6 hours of combat, his fleet should have swept the primitive humans from space and begun the systematic destruction of their homeworld. Instead, the Zephyrian forces had suffered actual casualties, while the human defenders continued to fight with a tenacity that defied all logical analysis. The reports from his ship commanders made no sense according to established military doctrine. Human vessels that should have been destroyed continued to function despite sustaining damage that would have crippled any rational design. Enemy pilots who should have been dead were somehow surviving encounters that violated basic laws of physics and probability. Most disturbing of all, the humans seemed to be getting stronger and more unpredictable as the battle continued. Veltar called for a status report from his tactical computers, and what he learned filled him with a cold dread that no Zephyrian commander had felt in over 1,000 years. The humans were not fighting according to any recognizable pattern. Their attacks came from unexpected directions, targeted seemingly random objectives, and used weapons in ways that no military engineer had ever intended. The alien war machines could not predict human behavior because the humans themselves appeared to be making decisions based on pure instinct. What Veltar did not understand was that this apparent chaos was actually the result of careful planning by Earth's military leadership. Admiral Johnson had studied the psychology of warfare and realized that humanity's greatest advantage was their ability to adapt and improvise under pressure. While alien forces relied on predetermined tactics and calculated responses, human fighters could completely change their strategy in the middle of battle based on nothing more than a sudden inspiration. Major Danny Foster was demonstrating this principle in spectacular fashion as he led his fighter squadron through the alien formation, using tactics that would have gotten him expelled from any military academy in the galaxy. His pilots attacked targets that posed no immediate threat, ignored obvious opportunities, and occasionally flew directly into enemy fire for no apparent reason. The result was a unit that moved through the battlefield like a force of nature that obeyed no laws except its own twisted logic. Danny's flagship was a converted racing ship called the Wild Card that had been modified with weapons salvaged from a dozen different sources. The ship should not have been able to fly, let alone fight, but it moved through space with a grace that seemed to mock the laws of engineering. When alien interceptors tried to engage it, the Wild Card would suddenly change direction, speed up, slow down, or perform maneuvers that were physically impossible according to Zephyrian understanding of momentum and inertia. The secret was that human engineers had long ago learned to build machines that worked even when they should not. Earth's ships were held together with spare parts, creative modifications, and the absolute refusal to accept that something was impossible. When systems failed, human crews would bypass them, reroute around them, or simply ignore them entirely, until they started working again through sheer, stubborn determination. Engineer Carol Davis was proving this point aboard the passenger liner Persistence as she kept her ship fighting despite damage that should have destroyed it 3 times over. The main engines were running on fumes, the weapon systems were held together with wire and determination, and the hull was leaking atmosphere from 17 different holes. According to every rational analysis, the ship should have been abandoned hours ago, but Carol refused to accept rational analysis. She had rerouted life support through the coffee machine, powered the weapons using energy meant for the entertainment system, and convinced the navigation computer to work by threatening it with a hammer. The Persistence moved through the battlefield like a drunken dancer, spinning and tumbling in patterns that no sane pilot would attempt, while somehow avoiding destruction through what could only be described as applied stubbornness. Captain Steve Miller was experiencing similar success with his garbage hauler squadron as they engaged Zephyrian capital ships, using tactics that violated every principle of space combat ever developed. His ships were slow, ugly, and completely outgunned, but they possessed something the aliens had never encountered, which was the human ability to turn any situation into an opportunity for creative problem-solving. Steve's flagship was a former waste management vessel called the Scrapper that had been armed with mining equipment and powered by engines that belonged in a museum. The ship should not have been able to damage a Zephyrian battlecruiser, but Steve had discovered that alien armor was designed to withstand sophisticated energy weapons, not industrial cutting tools, applied with maximum human stubbornness. The Scrapper close to point-blank range with an enemy capital ship and began systematically cutting through its hull using mining lasers that had been designed to slice through asteroids. The alien crew tried to respond, but their weapons could not target something that was literally crawling across their ship's surface like a metallic parasite. The Zephyrian vessel found itself being dismantled by what was essentially a flying junkyard operated by creatures who refused to acknowledge that they were completely outmatched. Dr. Helen Brooks continued her cyber warfare campaign from her underground bunker, flooding alien communication networks with so much random human data that their processing systems were beginning to fail under the load. She had moved beyond simple information overload and was now conducting what could only be described as cultural warfare against an enemy that had no defense against human creativity. Her latest weapon was a collection of human music that ranged from classical symphonies to death metal to experimental jazz performed by people who were probably insane. The alien computers tried to analyze these audio files for military significance and found patterns that seemed to suggest everything and nothing simultaneously. Beethoven's Ninth Symphony was interpreted as a complex battle plan, while a 3 Minute Pop Song was classified as a detailed technical manual for weapons that did not exist. The effect on Zephyrian command structure was becoming critical as communication delays mounted and tactical coordination began to break down. Ship commanders were receiving orders that made no sense. Intelligence reports that contradicted each other and status updates that seemed to have been written by poets rather than military analysts. The perfect efficiency that had made the Zephyrian fleet invincible was being undermined by exposure to human culture. Professor Alan Carter had taken the cyber warfare concept one step further by broadcasting human entertainment directly into alien ships where their crews were forced to confront television shows, movies, and internet videos that challenged every assumption they had ever made about rational behavior. Zephyrian officers found themselves watching humans perform activities that served no logical purpose, express emotions that seemed to contradict their own actions, and engage in conversations that followed no discernible pattern. The psychological impact on alien crews was severe as they struggled to understand opponents whose behavior made no sense according to any civilized standard. Some Zephyrian officers began to question whether humans were actually intelligent or if they were simply very sophisticated animals driven by random impulses. Others wondered if human chaos was actually a form of advanced strategy that they were too primitive to comprehend. As the battle entered its 12th hour, it became clear that something fundamental had changed in the nature of warfare itself. The Zephyrian Empire had built their military supremacy on the principle that superior technology and rational tactics would always triumph over primitive opponents. They had never faced an enemy that could match their firepower with pure human stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Commander Jake Martinez watched the battle unfold from his orbital station and felt a pride that went beyond military victory. Humanity was not winning because they were stronger or smarter than their opponents, but because they were more human. They fought with passion instead of logic, creativity instead of calculation, and hope instead of certainty. The aliens had superior weapons, but humans had something that could not be programmed into any computer, which was the absolute refusal to give up even when giving up was the only rational choice. The Zephyrian High Council convened an emergency session as reports from the Sol system painted a picture that challenged everything they believed about warfare and civilization. Fleet Commander Veltar's forces had been engaged with primitive humans for over 18 hours, and not only had they failed to achieve victory, but they were actually suffering significant casualties. The impossible was happening, and the Council needed answers. Immediately, Supreme Commander Zareth reviewed the battle reports with growing alarm. The humans possessed no technology that should have threatened Zephyrian supremacy, yet somehow their crude vessels were matching the Empire's finest warships in combat. More disturbing were reports that human tactics seemed to be evolving during the battle itself, as if the enemy was learning and adapting faster than any species the Zephyrians had ever encountered. The tactical analysis prepared by the Empire's war computers made for terrifying reading. Human forces were displaying capabilities that contradicted fundamental assumptions about military science. Enemy ships survived damage that should have destroyed them. Pilots made decisions that defied logical analysis, and entire formations moved in patterns that seemed to follow no mathematical model, yet somehow achieved tactical objective. Zareth ordered immediate reinforcement of Veltar's fleet and transmitted new orders that represented a fundamental shift in Zephyrian military doctrine. The time for restraint had ended, and the humans would be shown the full power of the Empire, regardless of the cost. What had begun as a simple conquest would become a demonstration to the galaxy that challenging Zephyrian authority would result in complete annihilation back in the Sol system. Veltar received his new orders with relief and trepidation. He was authorized to use any weapons necessary to end human resistance, but he was also beginning to suspect that conventional weapons might not be enough. The humans had demonstrated an ability to turn every disadvantage into an opportunity and every defeat into a learning experience that made them more dangerous. Dr. Lisa Thompson was proving this point from her laboratory beneath Colorado as she analyzed battlefield data in real time and transmitted tactical improvements to human forces throughout the system. She had discovered that the key to fighting Zephyrians was not to match their perfection, but to embrace human imperfection so completely that it became a form of superiority that alien computers could not understand or counter. Lisa's latest breakthrough came from studying how human crews responded to battle damage. While alien ships became less effective as they sustained damage, human vessels somehow became more dangerous. Crews would jury-rig repairs that improved performance beyond original specifications, reroute systems in ways that created unexpected capabilities, and modify weapons to perform functions their designers had never imagined. She sent her findings to Admiral Johnson, along with recommendations that would have been considered insane by any previous generation of military leaders. Earth's forces should stop trying to maintain their equipment in proper working order and instead embrace controlled chaos as a tactical advantage. Ships that were falling apart often performed better than ships in perfect condition because their crews were forced to be creative and their enemies could not predict how broken systems might behave. Admiral Johnson implemented Lisa's suggestions immediately, and the results exceeded her wildest expectations. Human ships that had been written off as combat losses suddenly returned to battle with modifications that turned their damage into weapons. The passenger liner Persistence had been crippled early in the battle, but its crew had converted its failed life support system into a device that generated electromagnetic interference that blinded alien sensors. Captain Ryan Davis was commanding one of these improvised vessels as his squadron engaged a Zephyrian battle group using tactics that could only be described as organized insanity. His flagship Lucky Strike had been rebuilt so many times during the battle that it bore no resemblance to its original design. The crew had welded extra weapons to the hull, rerouted power through systems that had never been designed to carry it, and convinced their computer to work by feeding it coffee and threatening it with percussive maintenance. The Lucky Strike moved through the battlefield like a mechanical zombie that refused to accept death. Its weapons fired in directions that seemed random but somehow always found targets. Its engines produced thrust that defied conservation of momentum, and its hull held together despite being more whole than metal. The ship had become a floating contradiction that drove alien tactical computers to the edge of complete breakdown. Major Danny Foster was experiencing similar success with his fighter squadron as they implemented what military historians would later call quantum combat theory. His pilots had stopped trying to predict enemy behavior and instead began making decisions based on pure intuition and random inspiration. The result was a unit that moved through space like a school of fish, changing direction and formation in response to stimuli that no outside observer could identify. Danny's fighters engaged Zephyrian interceptors using maneuvers that violated basic principles of physics but somehow worked anyway. They would accelerate toward enemy fire only to vanish at the last second, appear behind alien ships that had been tracking them in completely different locations, and perform barrel rolls that seemed to bend space around them. The human pilots were not following any flight manual because they were writing a new manual with every decision they made. Engineer Carol Davis had taken the concept of improvised engineering to its logical extreme aboard the Persistence as she kept her ship fighting using repairs that should not have been possible. She had connected the food replicators to the weapons system, powered the shields using energy from the artificial gravity generator, and convinced the navigation computer to work by playing it music from Earth's greatest composers. The Persistence had become something entirely new in the history of warfare, a ship that improved its performance by breaking down. Every system failure created new opportunities for creative modification, and every repair generated capabilities that exceeded original specifications. The vessel moved through the battlefield like a mechanical artist, creating masterpieces of destruction from the raw materials of chaos. Professor Alan Carter had escalated his cyber warfare campaign to levels that bordered on psychological terrorism as he flooded alien networks with human cultural content that challenged every assumption about rational behavior. His latest weapon was a compilation of human comedy that included everything from ancient jokes to modern internet memes to experimental humor that tested the boundaries of language itself. The effect on Zephyrian crews was devastating as they struggled to analyze content that seemed designed to break their understanding of logical communication. They found themselves studying videos of humans performing activities that served no apparent purpose, telling stories that had no clear meaning and expressing ideas that contradicted themselves within the same sentence. Some alien officers began to wonder if humans were actually an advanced form of artificial intelligence designed to simulate organic chaos. Dr. Helen Brooks had moved beyond information warfare into something that could only be called cultural contamination, as she broadcast human music, art, and literature directly into Zephyrian ships, where their crews were forced to confront creativity that followed no logical rules. The aliens discovered that humans could create beauty from discord, meaning from nonsense, and purpose from complete randomness. As the battle entered its 24th hour, it became clear that something unprecedented was happening in the Sol system. The Zephyrian Empire was facing its first military defeat in over a millennium, and the enemy responsible was a species that should have been conquered in a matter of hours. Worse yet, the humans seemed to be getting stronger as the battle continued, while Zephyrian forces became increasingly confused and demoralized. Commander Jake Martinez watched the tactical displays from his orbital station and realized that humanity had achieved something that would echo throughout galactic history. They had not just survived contact with a superior alien civilization, but had actually begun to win through the simple expedient of being so completely human that no rational opponent could predict or counter their behavior. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most powerful weapon in the universe was the absolute refusal to accept that victory was impossible. Admiral Kate Johnson stood in the command center deep beneath Cheyenne Mountain and gave the order that would echo throughout galactic history for thousands of years to come. All human forces throughout the Sol system received the same simple message that captured the essence of what it meant to be human when faced with impossible odds. Stop trying to win logically and start fighting like the crazy, stubborn, impossible species we are. The effect was immediate and devastating to Zephyrian forces who had spent the last 36 hours trying to understand an enemy that refused to behave according to any rational military doctrine. Now the humans abandoned even the pretense of logical behavior and began fighting with the pure, concentrated essence of human determination that had carried their species through ice ages, plagues, and every other disaster the universe had thrown at them. Captain Ryan Davis received Admiral Johnson's message aboard his flagship, Lucky Strike, and responded with a battle cry that became legendary throughout human space. We are not retreating. We are advancing in a different direction, and it is probably the wrong one, but we are going anyway. His squadron of converted cargo haulers immediately abandoned their defensive positions and charged directly into the heart of the Zephyrian formation, using a tactic that could only be described as controlled falling with style. The Lucky Strike led the charge despite being held together with spare parts, good intentions, and the absolute refusal to accept that anything was actually impossible if you were stubborn enough about it. The ship's weapons were firing in random directions. Its engines were producing thrust-through methods that violated several laws of physics, and its crew was singing old Earth songs at the top of their lungs while manually loading torpedoes that had been built in someone's garage using instructions found on the internet. Behind Ryan came every other human ship in the system as Earth's defenders gave up all pretense of military formation and attacked like a swarm of mechanical bees defending their hive. Garbage haulers engaged battle cruisers. Passenger liners rammed destroyers, and mining ships used industrial equipment to literally tear apart alien vessels that had been designed to withstand sophisticated energy weapons but not determined humans. With Power Tools Major Danny Foster led his fighter squadron in a charge that defied every principle of small craft tactics ever developed as his pilots abandoned their formation and began attacking targets based on pure instinct and random inspiration. They flew through alien formations like a flock of birds that had collectively decided to become predators, changing direction without warning and firing at targets that seemed to pose no immediate threat but somehow always turned out to be exactly what needed to be destroyed. Danny's fighters moved through the battlefield with grace that seemed to mock the laws of physics as they performed maneuvers that were impossible according to alien understanding of momentum and inertia. They would appear behind enemy ships that had been tracking them in completely different locations, vanish from alien sensors only to reappear inside. Formation patterns that should have been impossible to penetrate and occasionally stop fighting, entirely to perform aerobatic displays that served no military purpose but somehow confused alien targeting systems into complete breakdown. Engineer Carol Davis was demonstrating the ultimate expression of human engineering philosophy aboard the passenger liner Persistence, as she kept her ship fighting using repairs that had transcended the boundary between science and art. She had connected every system to every other system in ways that created capabilities no designer had ever imagined, and convinced her crew that their ship was not breaking down but evolving into something entirely new. The Persistence moved through the battlefield like a mechanical phoenix that was constantly destroying and rebuilding itself as it fought. Every hit that should have crippled the ship instead created new opportunities for creative modification, and every system failure generated capabilities that exceeded anything in the original specifications. The vessel had become a floating testament to human refusal to accept that anything was actually broken if you were creative enough about fixing it. Dr. Helen Brooks had escalated her cyber warfare campaign to levels that could only be described as information terrorism as she broadcast the complete contents of Earth's internet directly into Zephyrian networks, where alien computers tried desperately to find military significance in cat videos, cooking shows, and social media posts about what people had eaten for breakfast. The alien war machines were drowning in an ocean of human cultural content that made no logical sense, but somehow seemed to contain hidden patterns that their programming insisted must be decoded. Professor Alan Carter had taken cultural warfare to its ultimate conclusion by broadcasting human music directly into Zephyrian ships, where alien crews were forced to confront compositions that seemed to violate fundamental laws of mathematics and harmony. They discovered that humans could create beauty from chaos, meaning from randomness, and emotional responses that had no basis in rational analysis. Some Zephyrian officers began to suspect that humans were not actually intelligent but were instead some form of organic computer virus designed to infect other species with their particular brand of creative insanity. High Commander Veltar stood in his crystal command chamber watching his perfect fleet being systematically destroyed by opponents who seemed to be winning through sheer determination to ignore reality. His war computers were reporting tactical situations that should have been impossible and recommending responses to threats that could not exist according to established military science. The humans were not just defeating Zephyrian forces but were apparently rewriting the fundamental laws of warfare through the simple expedient of refusing to acknowledge that those laws applied to them. The final moment of the battle came when Commander Jake Martinez led the last desperate charge of Earth's orbital defense stations against the Zephyrian flagship. His station was a converted asteroid mining platform that had been armed with weapons salvaged from derelict ships and powered by reactors that were held together with duct tape and pure human stubbornness. The station should not have been able to move, let alone fight, but it accelerated toward the alien command ship with velocity that defied conservation of momentum. Jake's station collided with Veltar's flagship in an explosion that lit up space for millions of kilometers, but somehow both Jake and his crew survived the impact because their station had been built using human engineering principles that assumed everything would go wrong and planned accordingly. The mining platform tore through the alien ship's hull like a meteor made of pure determination and emerged from the other side trailing debris and broadcasting a message that would be remembered for as long as humans traveled among the stars. The message was simple and captured everything that made humanity unique in a galaxy full of species that had forgotten how to dream impossible dreams. We are just getting started, and if you think this was impressive, you should see what we do when we are actually trying. The Zephyrian fleet that had conquered 300 worlds found itself facing an enemy that treated impossible as just another word for Tuesday and responded by doing what no rational species would ever consider, which was to retreat. High Commander Veltar transmitted his final message before ordering the withdrawal of all Zephyrian forces from the Sol system. The communication was broadcast on all frequencies and became a warning that spread throughout the galaxy faster than the news of any previous military victory. Avoid the third planet of the Sol system, because the inhabitants are completely insane. And somehow that makes them invincible. Years later, when the galaxy had learned to fear and respect the small blue world that had taught the universe's greatest truth, Earth's message to the stars remained unchanged. We do not conquer, and we do not rule, but if you threaten our home or our friends, you will discover why. The most dangerous phrase in the galaxy is "hold my beer and watch this." The legend of humanity had begun, and it would echo throughout the cosmos for as long as there were stars in the sky and beings crazy enough to dream of touching them.